I'm really excited about the next problem we're going to work on because it's one of my personal favorites, in as much as you can have a favorite interview question. So inside my code editor, I'm going to find the chunk folder and then open up the index.js file inside of it. And then of course, before we forget, we'll also flip on over to our terminal and start up our tests as well. So just chunk test.js -- watch, like so. And just make sure that you have, let's see, 5 tests popping up. That's how many we have for this particular exercise. So let's look at the directions here. Inside the index.js file, you'll find the directions at the top. So given an array and a chunk size as arguments. And so look at the chunk function right here. It accepts an array and a size as argument. Using those, we want to divide the array into many subarrays where each subarray is of length size. So in other words, we're taking one big array and splitting it into many smaller subarrays that are all contained within one larger array. This function is probably easiest to understand when you start looking at some examples, so let's do exactly that. Let's look at the first one right here. If we call chunk with an array of the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and specify a chunk length of 2, then we should end up with one big array that contains smaller arrays inside of it. And so these smaller arrays are what we would refer to as the subarrays. Each subarray is of length 2, because 2 is what we passed in as the size. Notice that the 2 here is specifying the number of elements that go into each chunk. It's not specifying the total number of chunks. So 2 right here doesn't mean that we should have 2 separate chunks. It means that there should be 2 elements in each chunk. Perhaps the next one gives a little bit better example in that regard. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we still have a chunk size of 2. So in this case, we put 2 elements into the first chunk, 2 elements into the next chunk, and then there's only 1 element remaining. And so we take that one last element and put it into its own chunk at the very end. And then you can see this repeated throughout the other examples as well. Another good example might be the one down here, second to the bottom. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a chunk size of 4. So we create one chunk that has 1, 2, 3, 4 elements inside of it, and then the only remaining element goes into its own chunk. So in other words, if you have kind of an orphaned element, or you don't have enough elements to fill up its own chunk, that's totally fine. You just stick it into its own chunk at the very end. So that's pretty much it. That's the challenge. This is definitely a harder problem to solve, but nonetheless, I'd love it if you gave it a shot. I'm going to let you kind of take it from here without a lot more input from me. Consider this a little trial by fire. But of course, if you get stuck at all, don't sweat it. Watch a couple minutes of the solution and then come back and give it another shot. So quick break for you to work on this, and we'll look at the first solution in the next section.